Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Motivate Property Podcast. It is Thursday, the 13th of November, 2025. Hope everyone out there is having a fantastic week. Now, guys, this week we are talking about buyer's agents, right? And probably more in particular, the rise of buyer's agents now today in 2025. So, guys, for those who don't know what a buyer's agent is, today I'm going to go through and explain ultimately buyer's agents, what they are, what they do, how they help, really how to use them in the best way, as well as what to look out for to make sure you're not going to get stung by a dodgy operator, right? And obviously, unfortunately, this industry is full of them, which we'll go through today. Now, firstly, guys, before we get stuck into it, I think it's probably quite important to explain what a buyer's agent is, right? Now, a buyer's agent is someone who works in the property industry, right? Generally speaking, they're a property expert or a property specialist who is appointed by a buyer. So let's just say, for example, you're going to go and find a home that you wanted to purchase. You could actually engage a buyer's agent, so someone who works for you directly as a buyer, to go and source a property for you to buy, all right? Now, a buyer's agent, generally speaking, will handle all the research. They'll go and find the properties. They'll go and speak to the agents or the sellers. Generally speaking, they will negotiate the property for you. They'll apply or put an offer in on the property. They'll transact for it. They'll organise whether it's a case of referring to a broker or work with your broker and settlement agent to get the property settled. So they're essentially someone who works on your behalf as a buyer to go and find a suitable property. Now, most people probably haven't used a buyer's agent before because it's still quite a new, it is a new kind of job, right? And I'll go into that in a second. But most people who have sold a house before would have used with like a selling agent before, right? So a selling agent, or most people know a selling agent as like a real estate agent, but they're technically a selling agent. A selling agent is someone who works on behalf of a seller to sell a property, all right? So a buyer's agent is pretty much the mirror of what a selling agent does. So that's, I guess, kind of the first thing to really sort of explain when it comes to a buyer's agent. Now, secondly, a buyer's agent normally charges a buyer's agency fee. So most buyer's agents would charge anywhere from a 1.5 to a 3.5% fee. In fact, I've actually got a schedule in front of me, and this is looking at all of the comparable buyer's agent fees around the country. So this is online. So it's looking at New South Wales. The average buyer's agent fees between 1.2 to 3.5%. The average is around 2.31%, and then Victoria, Queensland, and so on and so forth. And so pretty much the bracket for most buyer's agents around the country is around that kind of 1.5 to 3.5%. That's the average. Now, what that means. So let's just say, for example, and I'll do a very quick calculation. Let's just say you're looking for a property that's worth $800,000. All right. Now, if you're going to pay a buyer's agent, say 3%, that means you're paying a fee of $24,000 for him to go and find you a property. All right. So again, a buyer's agent charges a fee. It's generally a fee for service. Most buyer's agents are around that 1.5 to 3.5. So let's just say he was going to charge you a 3% fee on an $800,000 property. That's $24,000 in fee. All right. Now, before we go any further, I know that's a lot of money for people. Right. And I get that. Right. And before I sort of get into the use of a buyer's agent, really where they come from, what they do, like how to actually use them properly and look at, what to look out for. The thing I also want to disclose to you guys is we actually are buyer's agents here. So that's one of the things that we do. That's one of the many arms of our business. That means that we can essentially be engaged by a client for a fee to go and find a suitable property for them. Otherwise, when it comes to finding, say, newer properties, we act as a builder broker, right? So they're the kind of two different worlds that we sort of sit in when it comes to accumulating properties for our clients. So like I said, I do want to sort of explain that, yes, we are buyer's agents. So there is a part of this where, there could be a conflict of interest in terms of, what I'm about to say, particularly in the fact that I'm about to start talking some real smack about buyer's agents, right? And I just want to let you guys know that from the get-go that we are buyer's agents and I'm about to talk a lot of shit about them, all right? And I want you guys to really understand why. So let's get stuck into it, all right? So firstly, I do want to say, as someone who is a buyer's agent, as someone who has acted as a buyer's agent before, and someone who highly recommends using them for the right purpose, I want to talk about what those purposes really are fundamentally, right? If you are someone who is, let's just say, for example, really time poor, right? Let's just say, hypothetically, you've got a really, really busy job, really good, high-paying job, and you physically don't have time to spend every weekend and week evenings going to home opens, applying for houses, applying for, putting on offers on properties. if you don't have the ability to go and do that, a buyer's agent could be really, really good for you. Now, let me give you guys an example of how this hasn't worked in the past. We have had many clients, particularly in the last 12 months, come to us. And they'll say something along the lines of, hey, Motivate, we really want to engage you guys as buyer's agents or to help us find a property. We've been putting offers upon offers upon offers on homes all year. We've put on 20, 30 offers on properties. We keep losing. And now, instead of buying properties at say 600 grand or 650, we're now looking at having to spend 750, 800 because the market's moved so long, because we've not been able to actually fulfill on and actually get these offers accepted. So in other words, having a buyer's agent, if you had to work with a buyer's agent from day one, and that buyer's agent was able to go and secure a property, back in the day, like a year ago, you literally would have saved tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in growth because you were able to take action through a buyer's agent a year ago versus still struggling today because you haven't actually achieved what a buyer's agent will achieve you, right? So I do want to say, firstly, if you're someone who's time poor, you don't have time to be on the ground and do the work yourself, absolutely use a buyer's agent. They're fantastic for that, right? The point is they are your eyes and ears on the ground doing the work for you. Yes, again, if it's a 3% fee, yes, that fee is $24,000. But if you were able to secure a property a year ago at 100 grand cheaper, like, you got to get that $24,000 is absolutely worth paying, right? So that's the first, I guess, sort of good use when it comes to a buyer's agent. The second use when it comes to a buyer's agent is someone who has the knowledge and expertise where you don't, right? So again, if you're someone who's a busy professional, you've never bought a house before, you don't know how to transact in property, you've never, purchased or invest or anything like that, and you're really struggling, and I guess the lack of information or the fear of getting something wrong is immobilizing you, yes, a buyer's agent is fantastic for you to use. Now, I want to give you guys a real life example of this. In 2012, I want to say, I was looking to buy my first home. Now, I grew up in like Mannington, Gosnells, Kenwick, around WA. So, a fairly cheap area, with its own, let's just say it's got its own issues. But the point is when I was looking to buy my first home, I was buying emotionally. I wanted to buy somewhere where I was familiar with. I wanted to buy something that I would be living in forever. I wanted to buy something that was near my family. And again, as someone who had no idea what I was doing, like what most investors do, is you look at the catchment area of where you live and you think, oh, cool, if I want to buy a house, I'm going to buy within the catchment area near where I live. In other words, you're going to buy in the 6 or 7 suburbs around the suburb and you think that's the best place to invest. That was my mindset in 2012. Now, let's just say I almost had the opportunity to purchase a new property in Canning Vale. For those who don't know about Canning Vale, so Canning Vale is a fairly new area in Perth. When I say fairly new, I'm talking like, 20, 30 years old, so it's not one of these really old suburbs. But I was literally this close to walking to that next appointment and purchasing the property for $299,000. Today, that property would be worth around 1.2 to 1.3 million. And guess what? I didn't buy it. Why? Because I chickened out. Right? I was too uncomfortable. I thought that, no, look, this is too risky. And I didn't purchase it. And instead what I did is I went and bought a house in Kenwick. Now, that house I bought for $345,000. Today it's worth about $650. All right. So sure, I've almost doubled my money on it. However, that was probably one of the worst financial decisions I've ever made. And that property in Kenwick, my very first home, is by far my worst performing property that I own. By far. Now, the point is, if you engage a buyer's agent, right? In other words, if I had engaged a buyer's agent back in 2012, and that buyer's agent actually did have the right expertise and knowledge that I've got today, that buyer's agent would have convinced me to buy that house in Canning Vale and not the one in Kenwick. And guess what? For a $20,000 fee, he would have made me hundreds of thousands of dollars more because he provided me the right advice. Now, again, this is just one anecdotal example of me and my situation, and one thing that I've actually physically gone through myself personally. But the point is, if you've got a really good buyer's agent who's got all the knowledge, who's got all the resources, all the expertise, they're going to help you make better decisions, find better properties, and make you literally hundreds of thousands of dollars more than you do this yourself, right? So that's the second best case use that I absolutely 100% agree with in using a buyer's agent for. All right. Now, number 3, the third, I guess, kind of benefit or reason you'd want to use a buyer's agent is, in theory, a buyer's agent will help you find properties that are either exclusive or off market. Now, this is where I'm going to call BS. All right. So a lot of buyer's agents out there market themselves and target people, saying things along the lines of, hey, look, I really want you to find me an exclusive off-market deal. Or they'll have an ad and it'll be like, oh, we can find you these exclusive off-market deals. Now, just so we're clear, and the reason why I'm calling BS on this idea that exclusive off-market is better is kind of silly, right? And I really want to kind of dig into this. Now, what an off-market deal is, and keep in mind, we get a lot of off-market deals like on a daily basis, is generally speaking, you've got different real estate agencies around, let's just say Perth or wherever you're from. Multiple real estate agents are constantly, taking on listings, right? So people are approaching and saying, hey, look, I want you guys to go and sell my property on the market, and then they'll go and list the property on the market and sell it for you. Generally speaking, what happens? Before property goes on as a listing to that real estate agency, a lot of the real estate agencies, what they'll do is they'll take the property and say, hey, look, we're about to get this listing, but what we're going to do is I'm going to actually flick this to all of my experts in the area and see if someone wants to buy it off market before we put it onto the market. Now, the benefit to the buyer is it's a quicker sale and there's less costs in like advertising and things like that. And so again, if there are people out there who are sending off-market lists, which like I said, we get a shitload of them on a daily basis, the point is like you can actually get yourself some pretty good deals, right? However, the thing that this is a bit of a loaded conversation, right? The way that I see off-market deals, it's almost like you're skimming 10% of the stock instead of reviewing 100% of the stock of what's on the market. So let's just say, for example, 90% of the properties are on the market and then 10% are off market. So 10% haven't quite made it on there because they're getting transacted before it goes onto market. Do I want to be finding properties in a pool of 90%, or do I want to be finding properties in a pool of 10%? All right. I want to try and find properties with the biggest possible net that I can essentially get my hands on. All right. So I would much rather go and try and find a property with inside a pool of 90% of houses versus that 10% of houses. And I'm not saying you can't find good deals off market. You absolutely can. But this is my point. The best deals that I've ever purchased personally have all been on the market. All right. In fact, one of the most profitable projects that I've ever purchased, I purchased a few months ago, and that was literally on realestate.com. And it is by far the best performing asset I've ever purchased. And if I could have an endless pool of money, I would buy an infinite amount of them. But the point is, if I had been, let's just say dogmatic and only wanted to find something that was off market, I probably would have missed out on this deal. Right. So again, all I'm really just saying here and suggesting here, the idea that off market is better is more of a sales pitch. It's more of an illusion than actual reality. Right. So the idea that, you're going to use a buyer's agent purely because he can get off market deals, I'll be honest, it's kind of nonsense. Right. And it's something like that's one of those things that I would assume when I see it, that kind of gives me some red flags, just understanding how the market actually works. Right. But like I said, I want to kind of provide those as the three main reasons why to use a buyer's agent. So firstly, just to recap, if you're time poor, secondly, if you need the knowledge or you need the expertise, and then thirdly, again, I would call BS on the fact that just because they can get off market deals. All right. But that's essentially the main reasons why to use a buyer's agent. Now, why is this important? And why are we talking about this today? All right. So the reality is buyer's agents didn't really exist around, 5-10 years ago. All right. There were obviously a lot more common on the East Coast. All right. Where you got obviously bigger purchase prices. You got a lot more, particularly in Sydney. Buyer's agents have been around for quite some time. However, they're still quite new in most other cities. In fact, most buyer's agents today weren't in the industry more than 5 years ago. It's an issue. Now, the reason why it's an issue and why I'm finding such of a problem, most buyer's agents out there aren't actually qualified. Now, when I say they're not qualified, are they technically qualified to be a buyer's agent? Yes, they are. But the problem is the barrier of entry is so low that anyone can basically be a buyer's agent tomorrow. Now, the reality is with the way the industry works, so, and I'm going to get into the weeds of terminology because I really want you guys to understand this, right? But when we think about selling a house, we think about seeing a real estate agent. Now, technically speaking, a real estate agent, that is someone who owns a real estate company. To be clear, technically, I'm a real estate agent, right? I own multiple agencies. So as a licensee or the person who's bona fide control of a real estate agency, I'm the licensed real estate agent. Now, within my team, I've got selling agents and buyer's agents. Now, a selling agent, like I mentioned at the start of this podcast, is someone who works on behalf of a seller to sell a property. A buyer's agent works on behalf of a buyer to go and find and source a property. All right, so they're kind of similar roles, but sort of inverted. In order to be a selling agent or a buyer's agent under a licensee, so under a real estate agent like myself, all you need to do is complete a selling agent's course. You can do it through Rewa. It's $1,000. Takes a couple of days. Right? So literally you could start that course tomorrow online and you could be a buyer's agent technically next week or a selling agent next week. Now, does that mean that any buyer's agency or any real estate agency is going to hire you the following week? Probably not. But the point is you've technically got the qualification in order to do that. In other words, if you went and got your selling agent's registration next week, the following week, you could start a business and become a buyer's agent and start your own business as a buyer's agent. So that's what I mean when I say the barrier of entry is so low. And I guess what my point is, in reality, these people aren't actually qualified to provide the advice that they're providing. Sure, they're technically qualified, but they're not actually qualified in reality. And I'm going to explain this in just a couple more minutes, right? Now, again, just to get really clear on this, when you do the sales registration course, all you're learning is how to transact in property. That's it. So when you do your selling agent to be a sales agent or a buyer's agent, you do the selling agent's course. All you're learning in that couple of day course is how to actually legally transact. The paperwork to use, the process, that's all you really learn, right? So again, if you're someone who's just entered the market as a brand new buyer's agent, you probably don't have property investment expertise. You probably don't have the expertise required to actually provide people property investment advice because all you know how to do technically is transact in property. All right. So again, this is where the problem begins. And this is kind of why I wanted to really explain this in greater detail to you guys, because most people don't realize that the buyers agent they're talking to or working with probably shouldn't be giving the advice that they probably are. All right. Now, here are some things to think about. This is fundamentally the 4 problems that I have with buyer's agents. Like I said, the first one's nice and easy. We've already been through that. 95% of buyer's agents weren't in the industry more than 5 years ago. Now, what does that actually mean? It means they're generally not qualified. It means they don't really have a lot of experience. It means that they've only ever seen the market booming. They've only seen the good times. So what's going to happen, because this happens every time, you got all these cowboys in the industry when markets are really, really good, people making lots and lots of money because they're in the industry to exploit the industry and essentially make as much money as they possibly can. As soon as the market turns, as soon as the demand for housing goes down, these guys vanish and leave the industry. All right? I want to make this point as clear as I possibly can. If you are working with a buyer's agent who's providing you any form of advice and they haven't been in the industry for more than 10 years, run. They have not seen the bad times. When shit hits the fan, and it invariably always does, because there's always a bust at the end of a boom, these people will vanish, disappear, and you will be left caught with your pants down, metaphorically, for lack of a better expression, right? So that's just one thing I want to be really clear about. Most of them haven't been in the industry for more than 5 years, in which case, run. Now, problem number 2. And this is probably speaking to a slightly bigger problem here. When you do the buyer's agency course or the selling agencies course, There is not a minute spent on how to do property research. Not 1 minute, not one module on how to do research. Now, I know when I say that, people think, hang on a second, Corey, but how the hell can that actually be reality when you've got these buyers agents and selling agents throughout here providing people with, all this property research? Like, surely in the courses they teach you how to do research. No, they don't. I'm telling you point blank right now. There is no time spent on research whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. Now, the question is why? How do you define property research? You can't. Why can you not define property research? Because it depends on the person, it depends on the strategy. Right, so let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, you're someone who wants to buy a home. Well, if you want to buy a home, the first question is, where do you want to buy? What are the stuff that you like? And then you go and find a property within inside that criteria. Now, the point is, when you're buying a home to live in, you're not looking at the market and the investment market and thinking, oh, I'm going to make these returns in, X, Y, and Z. What you're doing is you're buying emotionally. So again, if they were to sit on this course and say, cool, well, if someone wants to buy their own home, if you do anything other than ask about their preferences, you're probably leading up a garden path, right? Number one, that's the owner occupied. I'm going to put that to the side. Now, let's just say, for example, you're an investor. How do you do property investment research for an investor? Well, the first question I would have as a qualified and experienced professional is, well, what is the strategy that you're implementing? Are you implementing a buy and hold strategy? Are you implementing a growth strategy, a cash flow strategy, a development strategy? Because depending on just those four little options there, you're looking at completely different criteria, completely different numbers, completely different metrics to ensure that that's going to actually give you the result that you want. So again, for people to expect that buyers agents have all of this, quality time spent on actually how to do property investment research, guys, it does not happen. And so one thing that you just need to kind of understand, if your buyer's agent doesn't have the right experience, if they're not a qualified property investment advisor, again, I'd be running. Like I'd be walking away pretty bloody quick. All right. And again, I've seen ads of guys, talking about, hey, I'm a buyer's agent and, last year I was in FIFO and now I've got 3 properties, and it's like, holy shit. This is probably a person you probably don't want to be taking much advice from. All right. Now, problem number 3. Most buyer's agents are only qualified in their home state. Now, what does that mean? If you've got your qualification in Perth, if you've got your sales registration in WA, in Queensland or whatever state you're in, unless you have gone to each state by state and got the independent qualifications, which 99% of them haven't done, they can only operate within that state. All right. So for most of the clients and people listening to this who have worked with us before, you will know that that is one bad move. We look everywhere, right? Why? Because when the market in Perth is doing really, really well, places like Sydney may not be, because they're counter-cyclical. When, let's just say right now, the Melbourne market's down, the Brisbane market's up, you want to have the ability to be able to buy properties in all of these different states. So again, unless your buyer's agent is a borderless buyer's agent who can work nationally, I probably wouldn't be working with them, because they're not going to have the expertise to look interstate when the time is right. All right. And that's obviously something that we absolutely do. Now, number 4, this is probably the reason that makes me hate this industry the most. All right. The way that most buyer's agents operate. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying all of them, but this is absolutely most buyer's agents. Most buyer's agents, when you engage them and you pay the 3% fee, or you put your deposit down in preparation to pay your 3% fee, most buyer's agents will take your situation. They'll go and start ringing around the different real estate agencies that they've got partnerships with. And as soon as they've found a property with one of those different real estate agents that's suitable for you, they're going to say, hey, I've done the research and I found you a really awesome property. And all they're doing is taking the listings or the stock list of one of their mates, giving it to you, and then charging you 3%, 20 odd grand for. So in other words, most buyer's agents out there aren't actually doing research for you and your property. They're telling that you are, But that's not actually what they're doing in reality. In reality, all they're doing is going to their mates' lists, grabbing one of those properties that their mates are selling as a selling agent, and then passing on to you and then saying, I've done all this research and here's the property that I found you right for your situation. Now, if that is not one of the most unethical things you've ever heard of, let's just say that this industry is in trouble if that's the way it's going. All right. Not only is that extraordinarily lazy, not only is that predatory and they're straight up lying to your face, but the reality is this is giving everyone a bad name. This is giving us a bad name, right? Anyone who even attempts to be a buyer's agent, these people, these cowboys are what's giving us a bad name. Now, for those who've worked with us before, you'll sort of know that having a list, having a pre-made list of property options for our clients is something that I absolutely refuse to ever do, because that means that we're working on behalf of the sellers, not our clients. Any client who walks into our building, we don't have any properties available. We have to go and find it for you when the time is right. All right? That is the only way a property company like us should ever operate, ever. Unfortunately, most buyer's agents, all they're really doing is flogging you the properties that their mates are selling as selling agents. All right? Absolutely disgusting. Horrible way to conduct business. But like I said, guys, all these guys are doing is making their 20, 30 grand per property. As soon as the market turns, right, and they start pointing the finger, the clients start pointing the finger back at them and saying, hang on a second, this property's not really performing the way I want. These guys are going to vanish, all right? Unfortunately, we see this trend every cycle. Now, from here, I think it's probably also worth helping you guys navigate this, right? Which is obviously what I'm here to do. Now, like I said, I do want to reiterate, we are buyer's agents here. We do help our clients. And obviously the things that I've just said to you guys are things that we absolutely do not do. And I absolutely refuse to run a company that does those things. However, there are some important questions that I want you guys to think about considering and asking yourselves to make sure you're working with the right person, if it's not us, right? Number one, are they a member of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, PIPA, all right? So for those who don't know what PIPA is, PIPA, if you go to Property Investment Professionals of Australia or Google PIPA, this is essentially a body of property investment advisors. You've got to do a course. This is a 6-month course you've got to do with PIPA, through PIPA, like pay, it's like $3.5 grand or something like that to do the course. Once you've completed the course, you would be considered, and it's nationally recognized as a qualified property investment advisor. Now, in WA right now, I'm going to do this live. All right. So if I look at property investment advisors and I look in, say, Perth, and they're a QPA accredited member, right now, there are 2, 4, 6, 8. So there are 9 companies in WA that are QPIAs, and we're one of them. All right. So what that goes to show, out of all the real estate agencies and property companies in WA who are claiming to be property investment experts or property investment advisors, there are actually only 9 companies in WA that's technically qualified and experienced to provide the advice. Now, why am I ranting about PIPA so much? In order to be a member of PIPA, there are a couple of things that you need to do. Number one, you need to do the QPIA course. So you actually have to have the experience to be able to complete the course. Like, if that's not the freaking bare minimum, I don't know what is, right? Number one. Number two, you have to always work within your client's best interest, which means if I bring a client on, I have a fiduciary duty to do everything in my power to help that client meet their goals. If I'm now conflicting my advice because I'm getting a backdoor payment from some developer, that means I work for the developer, not my client. That's illegal, breaking the law. You're not going to be able to be a member of PIPA. All right. So the second thing, you've got to have your client's best interest at heart. All right. And client's best interest is the highest priority. Number three, you've got to disclose your fees and commissions. So again, if you're working with a property company that are saying that, hey, look, you've got no fees and there's no commitment. Like, they're lying to you. They're getting some backdoor payment from somebody, right? Otherwise, how the hell they open the doors? Again, there's also, I've seen some examples where buyer's agents are charging like $1,000 fee or a $2,000 fee. Trust me, guys, the amount of work and risk that's required to be a buyer's agent, it costs tens of thousands of dollars, right? If they're charging you $1,000 or $2,000 to do that work, just understand that they're getting a backdoor payment from somewhere, and that backdoor payment is going to be reflected in your property price. That's just the reality, right? As someone who's worked in this industry for long enough, if they are not charging you, above 1.5% or 2%, like, guys, they're getting paid by somebody else. They work for somebody else, not just you, right? So there's an absolute conflict. So that's another question to ask. Now, number 4, and this is probably one of the most important things to consider when it comes to working with the right professionals. Have they told you about the risks of property investment? And have they shown you on ways to mitigate those risks? Right, guys, the amount of people that I see online providing property investment advice, and it's so glaringly obvious they've got no idea what they're talking about. Unfortunately, to the average person, you can't really tell who's who. But when it comes to risk, and in fact, let me take you down a different direction. I've said this before in this show, and I'm going to say it again. And I want you guys to really, really consider this. Successful investing is not about making money. Successful investing is about mitigating risk consistently over time. You can make millions and millions and millions of dollars. If you're bankrupt tomorrow, it was pointless. It's not about making millions of dollars. It's about making millions of dollars and having the ability to keep it no matter what happens. That is wealth, all right? So for all these property spruikers and property experts and blah, 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 blah online who are sitting there and telling you all these great things about property, if they are not sitting you down like what we do and take you through a 20-page document just talking about risks of property investment, how to mitigate those risks, guys, they are not qualified. And they should not be, like, they're not going to be a member of PIPA, right? I mean, when you do the property investment professionals course, like, it is punched home so hard about risk of property and making sure your clients are aware of risk. If you're providing the advice, you need to be able to provide your clients with risk and risk mitigation. The point is, I've seen that many people go through this process with buyer's agents there who don't even know what the freaking risks of property are, all right? Again, that is one of the questions to be asking. Another question I'd be asking, how long have you been in the industry and what's your experience? Again, if they haven't been in the industry and seen, massive waves in the cycles, they're probably not worth the experience that they're just like, I'd be running, right? You need to make sure you're working with someone with experience who's not only seen the good times, who's also seen the bad times. Because when the bad times come, you do not want to be reacting to the market. You want to be responding to your strategy. Very important. Like I said before, making sure they understand the risks and how to mitigate those risks. And then finally, I'd be asking the question of how they get paid, right? If again, their fee is extraordinarily low, or, it seems like it's a little bit vague or a little bit somewhat misleading, guys, they're getting paid by somebody else. They work with somebody else. They do not work for you, and they probably shouldn't be a buyer's agent. So like I said, guys, there's a lot in that to unpack. But what I wanted to do today was just really give you guys the justice, the pros and cons, and the reality when it comes to the buyer's agency market, right, and the buyer's agency model. Again, guys, I do want to say, I do think buyer's agents absolutely have their use. I think they're a great thing if they're used properly for the right people. Does everybody need them? Absolutely not. Are most of them in the market rubbish? Absolutely. All right, so just take that with what you need. Any questions you guys have as well, please send them through, flick them through, and more than happy to help anytime. That's pretty much it for this week, guys. Have a great week. Love you all, and we'll see you next week.